Of the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints are telling us about a major change to an important temple ceremony, specifically changes to how services are carried out for women. ABC4's Sarah Martin spoke with historians and church members today about what these changes mean for women of the faith.
The church has explained that in the temple, members make covenants to God. Attendees have told us that in the temple, men covenant to God, while in one area, women covenant to obey their husbands as long as their husbands obey God. But not anymore.
I'm very excited to find out that we'll be making the same covenants that men make going forward.
April Young-Bennett is a Mormon feminist who's been asking for changes like these for years.
Discussing theology was one part of it, but that led to letter writing campaigns where people would contact general authorities and talk to them about the temple ceremony and about their concerns about it.
She explained that it can be nearly impossible for members to communicate their concerns to church leaders.
For a very long time, the Executive Council over temples was composed solely of men. However, fortunately, about 5 years ago, Sister Rosemary Wixom became the first woman to be admitted onto the Temple Executive Council, and I really think that including women has made a big difference.
There have been many changes to the temple ceremony over time. A record is not kept of them.
Professor Kathleen Flake explained that changes to the temple ceremony occur in part because it's an oral tradition aimed at finding and doing God's will. Major changes to the ceremony occurred in the 70s and again in the 90s, as well as small changes in recent years.
Mormonism lives in that tension between believing in truth as an eternal phenomenon and living prophecy as inherently demanding an acceptance of change over time.
The church released a statement along with the changes that did not explain them specifically, but emphasized the importance of temple worship. But some women still have questions.
Are the covenants, the wording of the covenants that was there 10 years ago, is that what applies to me? Or is the new wording that we're much more comfortable with, is that the wording that applies? It gives us a lot of hope to see that something so important to us has been recognized, that our prayers have been answered.
I've spoken with many people in the last day who are overjoyed by these changes. I've compiled some of their responses on abc4.com. Reporting in the newsroom, I'm Sarah Martin, ABC4 News.
And multiple people also told us that they were actually interviewed by the church about their experiences at the temple in the months before these changes were made.
Now, today also marks 125 years of statehood for Utah. That will be a part of today's ceremonies. Interestingly enough, Utah had to renounce polygamy as a condition of statehood. Lieutenant Governor Henderson passed a bill last year when she was in the state Senate that actually decriminalized polygamy. But she says Utah still remains a state.
Even with the laws that we passed last year, decriminalizing it, it's still illegal. But what we tried to do with that was to make sure that people who do practice polygamy aren't feeling like they're outcasts in society, that they're not feeling like they can't go to the police, for example, if there's a problem, or can't go to the doctor because they live in fear that they're going to be prosecuted for a felony and potentially go to jail or lose custody of their children just for that fact. So that's the problem that we tried to solve last year.
Travis Wayne Goodsell, with the information provided to us by Fox 13 News Utah on the social media network, YouTube. Became necessary to do a video as an LDS critic, being the only one to report and investigate the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints for crime and corruption, as nobody else will touch it unless it becomes blatantly obvious to the public. Thus, the need for further investigation by those whose job it is to do so. So you don't wait until something shocking happens, that you uncover it and shut them down. And a particular case was polygamy, because Hendrickson, I believe is her name, our new lieutenant governor, being sworn in any hour now, she was responsible for getting the change of polygamy from a felony down to a little, not even a misdemeanor, it's more of a fine, a slap on the wrist, $750 fine, I believe it said in the article. It's Mercury News, but Reuters is the one who published it on February 18th, 2020, updated February 19th. Let's see. Yeah, limited to fines of up to $750 and community service. So the church, yeah, petty change. Petty change. And they already claim to be doing community service. So, yeah, the church benefits greatly from this new law that was implemented, now I can say, last year. And so, despite the inherently dangerous and harmful to women and children, particularly young girls, some of whom have been forced into marriages with older men, quoting from the news story last year, it now becomes a slap on the wrist for raping little girls and sex trafficking throughout the various states. And so, let's take you on a historical journey of polygamy. Brigham Young started it in 1852, despite all other reports to the contrary. Remember, the Book of Mormon condemns it 4 times. First, with the Great and Abominable Church. Second, with Jacob, talking about the commandment given by Lehi. Third is I think King Noah is first. Then King Noah was practicing it, and then Amulek, the missionary partner of Alma, he confesses that he was practicing polygamy as part of his wicked days, and because he uses wives in the plural. And so 4 times polygamy is condemned in the Book of Mormon. Then you have the Doctrine and Covenants from 1835, condemning polygamy twice. There was a whole chapter on monogamy, condemning polygamy. Then you also have Section 131, which originally, before Brigham Young gutted it in order to put in Section 132, Joseph Smith is talking to one man and one woman about how their sealing as one man, one woman will gain them exaltation in the highest degree of the celestial kingdom. And so despite all the other nonsense that came about after 1852, although Brigham Young and Heber C. Kimball were involved secretly in sexual relationships with other women during this time. Heber C. Kimball, to repeat the information again, had a first wife, had a second wife, or at least a sexual concubine, of whom he had a child in 1829. And yes, remember, the church was organized April 6th, 1830. So what's Heber doing with a second wife before the church is organized and then joins the church? His third wife was in 1842 or 3. The more time passes, the more I forget, because I don't memorize. I have reference materials that I can refer to so that I don't have to memorize. But Heber, again, impregnates a third woman. This is on the Kimball family site, talking about Heber and his wives, giving the dates and the children, and so we know it's legitimate because the Kimballs are open about it. And yet, if you understand how Joseph Smith set up the church, he was the sealer. Only he could seal people. There were no temple sealers. That was a Brigham Young, branch off church creation. And so, what was going on with Joseph at the time? Did he actually perform this sealing? No! He was running for his life because Brigham and Heber ordered Orrin Porter Rockwell to assassinate Governor William Boggs. And so Governor William Boggs, called for his arrest, and so Joseph had to go into hiding. And so he was not capable of sealing Heber during this time period. But yet Heber claimed to have gotten sealed to a third wife. Yeah, it was Brigham Young who was doing it. And so all the reports about Joseph Smith secretly practicing polygamy, no, it was Brigham and Heber and the Danites. And so there was sexual promiscuity among the early saints, as the Brighamite Danites were dabbling where they shouldn't be. And so 1852 is the real history of when it was officially, publicly started here in the Salt Lake Valley. And so brothels were created. Well, why, Travis? They have lots of wives. Why do they need brothels? If you've listened, I've been watching crime shows and stuff, and that's in Castle especially. The guilty person, right before they confess in the last 5 minutes of the show, they always ask, why would I do something like that? So, you don't want to be asking the cops, why would I do that? Because that's what they're looking for, is motive, so that they can then threaten you to plead guilty, so that they don't have to go to trial and prove their case. And so brothels are necessary because if you have a limited number of women and they're being sealed mainly to Brigham and Heber and his newly formed 12 apostles, you're going to have Mormon men who aren't going to have wives. Evan Stevens is likely to be one of such men. I'm related to Evan Stevens. He's the third great uncle, as his sister got polygamously married. But he never got married. Started the Mormon Tabernacle Choir, which we can no longer call the Mormon Tabernacle Choir because now Jesus is mad that it was called the Mormon Tabernacle Choir. And so he came because his sister and cousin also were a part of this. or however she was related. There's some controversy over the accuracy of the information, because my family line tells me one thing, Wikipedia tells me another. I'm likely to believe my family line, but nonetheless, he never got married. And there are claims that, oh, he loved this girl back in Wales, and she married another guy, his best friend, and so he never married since. Well, with so many hot chicks in the pioneer Mormonism, why would he pass up such an opportunity, especially when Brigham Young's allowing polygamy and 10 virgins? It's because there weren't enough women to go around. And his cousin apparently never got hitched to anybody during her lifetime, as she became the maid for Evan Stevens. And so she got sealed after his death, got permission for that. That's what happens under polygamy with a relatively small community, is that you run the risk of running out of women for the men. The FLDS Church, if you remember that whole scandal that, got the feds involved, the old men, leaders, under Warren Jeffs, were still horny in their old age, because that's how we roll, despite women's disapproval. And they decided that they needed more wives, and they didn't have legally aged women anymore. They were all married off to them. So, you go after the younger generation when they start turning of 12 and 14 years of ages. And so that's what they did. But the rising generation of boys were now being denied having a little haughty FLDS girl to be married to, let alone to be a polygamist as well, because there are just not enough women for guys. And as a result, the boys had to be booted out of the community. They became the Lost Boys, not to be confused with the movie back in the 80s, vampires. And so then Judge Tina Campbell, who's now the judge over my case, the fourth judge in the case, who's getting back from vacation today and should be in the office by now, and who should be receiving my email along with Judge Shelby. Nonetheless, she was the one in charge of it, and asked the church, hey, can you guys help with these Lost Boys, since FLDS is a branch off of your church? And the church said, hell no. We ain't taking care of them. They're of the evil apostate church. So, and so that's the atrocities that occur with polygamy, especially in small communities. When you're running out of men, you need to start practicing polygamy quick. Otherwise, you're going to have an extinction level event of humanity. And regardless of whether women would never pair up with you if you were the last man on earth, you have to do it for mankind. I hope it doesn't come to that, women. Nonetheless, so that's what was going on in Mormon, Utah. You've got the leaders getting all the women, And you get the other women who didn't want to dabble with the leaders, who got married to Joseph Smith instead, posthumously, so that they can be taken care of by the leaders. And so they're untouchable as well. And so you get men who are in a situation where they have nobody to love. And what do we do? And so, yeah, you create brothels. You get a madam in charge of the brothel that is run by Orrin Porter Rockwell first. Yeah, he was rewarded. Isn't that nice? And Point of the Mountain here in Utah. And so the girls that are used are actually girls. They're not full-grown women necessarily. It's unclear as to who was involved in the brothels, but that's where you get the underage sex trafficking that goes on as a result of polygamy. And so the United States was expanding westward, and 2 years after, 1847, the United States had conquered Mexico, chased them back to couldn't chase them back to their country because it was their country that we kicked them out of. And so, yeah, it becomes Utah territory instead of the Kingdom of Deseret with Brigham Young as the king. And so they allow Brigham Young to become governor of the territory of Utah. That didn't last long. He sent a terrorist threat letter to the United States telling them to get out of our land. And so thus they sent the troops in to prevent the Salt Lake Temple with the inverted pentagram on it from being built for 40 years. and then you have the anti-polygamy laws that were getting worked on in Congress. You can go to the Wikipedia, Edmunds-Tucker Act, and Wikipedia. They go over the legislative history and the codification and such. But it was established in 1887. Now, this was before Utah became a state in the Union in 1896, January 4th. And so notice, it's the 125th anniversary today. However, Utah never celebrates this day, other than for inauguration purposes for the governor. The actual celebration of Utah is not for Utah, it's for Deseret, the Kingdom of Deseret, when Brigham Young kidnapped all the women, holding them hostage and sexually abusing them and transporting them across county or country lines in this particular case. And so the Edmunds-Tucker Act destroyed the church, literally. Disincorporated Brigham Young's 1852 incorporated organization. And because they would not stop polygamy. And so everything but the other temples that, I think it was just a Logan one, wasn't it? And the Endowment Center, but the brothels, the brewery, the tobacco plantations, gone, no more. And the church had to go in debt to rent back what they could. What's now called the Lion House and the Beehive House, for example, had to be rented back, and some other necessary features for the church. As Lorenzo Snow, if you know your church history, is the one who went down to St. George and gave a talk down there where all of a sudden in the middle of his talk he receives revelation from God to start practicing the mafia tactic of protection rackets. Literally, tithing now became a protection racket, hitting up the Mormons for the money to bail themselves out of debt, as it's covered up now as the windows of heaven to restore the fields down in St. George so that the crops can produce crops from the drought. Yeah, no, it was to get the church out of debt. And so, yeah, the protection racket was now implemented as Utah went through some struggles, as they still had to get arrested for still practicing polygamy after the Edmunds-Tucker Act decimation of the church, because it didn't finally get fooled into having stopped polygamy, as 1896 was the year when it was finally incorporated as a state in the Union. And yet there's still problems after becoming a state in the Union, as you get the Reed-Smoot hearings. Reed-Smoot was a senator from Utah who had to go in and testify in his own Senate about the continued practice of polygamy in the temples. And so thus came the official declaration, even though they predated it with the version that we have in our official declaration in the Doctrine and Covenants at the end. And so finally everything's settled. The FLDS, if you're wondering, they were branch-offs after the Edmunds-Tucker Act, as they were all upset with Wilford Woodruff and thought that he was a fallen prophet because he didn't stand up to the United States and demand we continue practicing polygamy and go to war to preserve the right to rape and pillage and plunder women. And so yeah, you get all Reds and other groups of popular notoriety, of infamy, as well as the eventual Warren Jeffs group. And all of it was based on the revelations from God through John Taylor, which it's interesting that the church claims that John Taylor is the rightful successor of Brigham Young, because John Taylor was supportive of Adam as Heavenly Father, whereas Orson Hyde, who was in line to become the successor when Brigham Young died, was opposed, and so Brigham Young demoted him because of the leadership crisis, which I'm the only one who covers in church history, in 1838. And so John Taylor got revelations, and the church no longer recognizes those revelations, having taken them out of their Doctrine and Covenants. But these other groups claim that his Doctrine and Covenants passages that were included are still of spiritual order and command. But the church now claims that those are secret documents of John Taylor, fake documents. I can't believe it when I heard that. And so, yeah, because I found his documents and made sure to have them for my collection, because that's what you do when you investigate. And so, yeah, you got the mess from the FLDS groups. And so we then get to 1978. The Edmunds-Tucker Act is repealed. The United States just decides one day on their own, oh, hey, we've got this law about the Edmunds-Tucker Act, I guess we should drop it, repeal it now, because there's no need for it anymore, right? Yeah, since when does Congress do stuff like that? Never. And so, yeah, clearly the church was involved in a quid pro quo, because what else happened in 1978? Oh yeah, blacks got the priesthood. Yeah, because the church is no longer racist. They're magically cured of racism. So, despite a few who continued on after, and the church still segregates the black church called the Genesis Group to their downtown chapel that they use. And so, yeah, it's horrifying when I saw a member of the church walk into the stake center where we were holding our ward meetings, and as a secretary in the elders quorum at the time, I needed to find out who he was so that I can report to the elders quorum president. And other people would come up and introduce themselves and say, have you heard of the Genesis Group? He just showed up. Let us find out if he's in our ward boundaries first before you kick him out. So yes, he was. Turned out to be a good guy, but man, really abused here in Utah. All the struggles he went through. So yeah, racism is alive and well in Utah. I think we had tried to get him to be a counselor, but he had too many problems from attacks that he was dealing with to show up to the meetings and to church eventually. So I hope he's still doing well, because I think he's moved out. I've been away from church for a long time, as you're aware if you've been watching the videos, because the bishop kicked me out for saying Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon are true. Yeah, you missed that part? Well, I'm not going to cover it here. And so, yeah, we see that the church is wheeling and dealing to reestablish polygamy again. But they allow time to elapse, allow time for people to forget. And then we get to Russell M. Nelson. And we get to, Benson, he allows the word obedience to husbands to change to hearken unto the counsel of your husbands as he hearkens unto the counsel of the Father. Yet my wife and mother-in-law, well, now woman formerly called my first ex, and her formerly called my first ex's mother-in-law. Gets so complicated. We're still upset and wanting to wear the pants in both families. as yes, I was severely abused in that first relationship. As a Mormon who is taught that you don't divorce your wife, you make the marriage work. And so yeah, she took advantage of that big time. Also that she can claim victimhood by forcing me to divorce her, which I never did because of the church's upbringing and teachings. And so she had to be the one to finally do it and get support and aid from the church and from our families. Yeah, so much for the family proclamation. Nonetheless, bigamy is still practiced, by the way, because Mormon women who get divorced, the divorce is not recognized by the church. You have to get a sealing cancellation, and thus bigamy is practiced in the church by men. Getting the women to be a part of that, because the church will not cancel the sealing of all divorced people as a matter of practice. And so yeah, in 1991, when I finished my mission, Benson has changed it so that women no longer obey, they now hearken. And things go on as women were fooled back then, saying, oh, we no longer have to obey. We can now run the family, as our husband is just the token who sits on his throne in the master bathroom. So time goes by as I witness in the elders' quorum meetings of the married men who say, oh, my wife is so much more spiritual than I'm worthless scum. That's what happens when you have false doctrines being presented, false temple rituals. And so Nelson takes over. And under Nelson, he changes the temple text. And he tricks women, deceives them, because the news report says, oh yeah, women are so excited and we're so happy. There's a segment in the video that I'm hoping to put in for you from the news back in 2019. The feminist leader. Our prayers have been answered. It's hilarious for multiple reasons. One of which is, aren't the leaders of the church already in communication with God and Jesus Christ directly? As they claim they are? So did women get God to change? Or did women expose the church leaders as not listening to God? I don't think she fully understood what she meant by God heard our prayers. But let me clarify something here for you, members and ex-Mormons now. If you have to change a church to be good to you, regardless of whatever reasoning, whether it's sexual, racial, bigoted, other hate, whatever, you might want to start considering that maybe the church is not correct. It's not true. And instead of trying to change it, maybe you should start looking for a true church instead. And if you start saying, well, religion is all man-made and therefore none of it's true, then why are you then participating in a church at all? But that leads into another discussion. So, part of the changes that Nelson made was, yes, Eve now has a bigger speaking voice in violation of Paul. Women should keep silence in church. And which was actually a redactor. That's a linguistic discussion for you. It wasn't actually Paul, but put in there specifically to blame Paul and thus elevate the Pauline records. And oh man. And so the women no longer have to veil their faces. And the church has since changed the women's robes so that it no longer includes a veil. And so all you women now have to buy the revised veil, which is a non-veil veil. It's most likely a similar cap thing that guys wear. But women thought, oh great, we're being liberated. God's finally freeing us at last, Also, women in the law of obedience, the covenant of obedience, which the news segment does not mention, it's the law of obedience. If you're gonna cover the news and report on it, know the subject matter. And I'm pretty sure she's Mormon. Why doesn't she just say the law of obedience? See, women now obey God instead of her husband. And so women no longer need to obey her husband, as she now runs the family. She's now the dominant presider in the home. As you know, that's how many Mormon women who are like my formerly first ex wanted to be in the first place. And so, yeah, that's obviously going to lead to an even greater number of emasculated men in the church as a result of this, who are going to feel like low-life scum now, as the women can just walk all over them and treat them like men have previously treated women in the church, which is never the solution for abuse. You don't reverse things. That doesn't solve anything. And people may think, oh, it's solving it for us in the short term. Yeah, the short term. The long-term effects are going to be very dangerous. And so with all the other racist, sexist, bigoted, other hate situations where people want to do a full reversal, women in the workplace, for example. Well, what's going to happen if women replace the men in the workplace? Women are going to be happy, aren't they? Well, what's going to happen to those men who got replaced? Yeah, there's going to be consequences. And that's why those are never the answer. You don't replace. You have to figure out a whole new system, because it's the system that is wrong. And so, women are all happy now. But there's a catch that everybody missed, but me, and the woman formerly called my second ex. Because she informed me of this. And she was hesitant to do so, because I'm no longer a Mormon. I'm an antichrist, apostate, evil man, and I can't know of what's going on in the temple. And I remind her, remember, we got sealed in the temple. I can quote to you from the temple. Adam, 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 where art thou? I heard thy voice and hid myself because I was naked. Who told thee that thou wast naked? Hast thou partaken of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, of which I commanded thee not to partake? The woman thou gavest me, and commanded that she should remain with me, she gave me of the fruit of the tree, and I did eat. Eve, what is this thou hast done? The serpent beguiled me, and I did partake. Lucifer, what hast thou been doing here? I have been doing that which has been done on other worlds. What is that? I have been giving some of the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil to them. Lucifer, because thou hast done this thing, thou shalt be cursed above all the beasts of the field. Upon thy belly shalt thou go. See what I mean? And so she can't trick me into keeping secret what I already know. And so, yeah, she told me that the law of chastity was changed. So I went to the new change with her right there with me, and we looked over it, and I therefore got the screen caption of it, of which I've been using in my videos, and used it in my lawsuit to expose the church of what Nelson was going to be doing. Because remember what happened in 2019 also. There was an announcement given. We're going to shut down the Salt Lake Temple and Temple Square starting in 2020. And so here you have polygamy and the law of chastity now, according to God's law, which is 10 virgins, section 132. And you have the church shutting down Temple Square and the temple so that you don't have the mass tourist destination that is typical for Utah. And when it's shut down, what happens? Coronavirus? Huh. Isn't that interesting? And so here you have the breaking news from the Utah legislature that the Utah Senate votes to decriminalize polygamy in February, right before I notified the court, of which then Nelson responded at least a week later. It didn't do it immediately. And when he came out with his first presidency statement that he's changing the temple text again, you can tell he's pissed. The speculations of evil people determined to hurt the church. I can't remember the wording, but yeah, he was pissed. And so, we don't know yet, because I've not heard of any leaks of whether or not this change has been made and what other changes were made. But clearly he was pissed of something recent, as this has been going on for over a year. So why wasn't it an issue before? Everybody was happy before. And so, yeah, you have polygamy on the backs of the church leaders' minds, as Oakes himself came out with the talk about trusting in the Lord, I think is the title of it, where he starts off talking about a woman who asks him, who is to be my husband, or where do I fit in am I the first wife, or am I the second wife in the afterlife, in the celestial kingdom? And he says, don't worry about it, trust in the Lord. So, Oaks clearly has polygamy on his brain, and just like his ancestor Martin Harris, who came with Brigham Young so that he can have polygamous wives. I think, let me check here. Let me make sure I'm correct on the information. Latter-day Saints. Split with Joseph Smith. Rebaptism into Brigham Young's church. What about his death? Marital conflict? Marital conflict sounds right. In part because of their continued disagreement over the legitimacy of Smith and the gold plates, and because of the loss of his farm, Harris and wife separated. Lucy Harris was described by Lucy Mack Smith as a woman of irascible temper, but claims have been made that Harris had abused her. Well, it was Harris who destroyed the 116 pages, not Lucy. So apparently this is not... she also claimed that her husband may have committed adultery with the neighboring Mrs. Haggart. There's 3 connections there. One was Lucy Mack Smith who claimed it. Lucy Harris stated it, and then in March 1830, a revelation from Smith warned Harris not to covet thy neighbor's wife. Doctrine and Covenants, 1925. Oh, okay, so it's legitimate. They actually used proper source material in Wikipedia. I'm shocked. Let's see. Lucy Harris died in the summer of 36. And so soon thereafter he married Caroline Young, 22-year-old daughter of Brigham Young's brother John. Okay. Starting to see something emerge here. About this guy. Split with Joseph Smith in June 1841. Okay, so yeah, he was a part of the Strangeites. Did he murder death kill John Spartan? After the death of Joseph Smith, Harris continued his earlier pattern by remaining in Kirtland and accepting James Strang as Mormonism's new prophet. He was one of them. James Strang was murdered when he implemented polygamy on the island of Michigan. Interesting. Because it makes sense, because that's what got him interested in Joseph Smith, because Joseph Smith claimed plates and all that. James Strang, likewise. Interesting. But then he was rebaptized into the Brighamite Church, Cache Valley, where my mom's Smith family then eventually moved to from the Carolinas, North Carolina, where my maternal great-grandfather was the chicken farmer up there. But I've not seen anything about other wives. So apparently they were all taken when he got rebaptized. In 1870, at 87, Harris moved to Utah Territory, and shortly afterward was rebaptized into the Brighamite Church. You can't be rebaptized into something that didn't get organized until 1852. Harris had been left destitute. Yeah, so please take me back, I'm destitute. And without a congregation in Kirtland. Yeah, notice Kirtland was where Sidney Rigdon went back to form his own congregation. I don't know if they talked about how he didn't go with him. There's David Whitmer, Gladdenite, Willamite, and Shaker. Yeah, he didn't even consider Sidney Rigdon as being a part of something to check out. And so they're leaving that part out. As Sidney Rigdon is the one who wrote the Book of Mormon. Let's see. And so, yeah, no more women to be married off to. And so Martin Harris did not have extra wives. So I wonder if maybe it says under Dallin H. Oaks. Family. Oaks married. Baker, lots of children. Meredith McCain. They no longer talking about that link? Seriously? I've got to do. Is Dallin H. Oaks a descendant of Martin Harris? Yes. He is the second great grandnephew of one of the three witnesses to the Book of Mormon, Martin Harris. It doesn't say which wife it is, though. And it is under Wikipedia. Background in education. Okay. Alrighty. But yeah, it doesn't say which wife. And I don't know if I can see here. Lawrence K. Flake, 2001. And then Dallin H. Oaks himself. Can't rely on him for a source. But yeah, apparently he's trying to make up for Martin Harris, his ancestor, and not getting those 10 virgins, as he's drooling for his opportunity to be a polygamist in 2024, when the temple will be finished and thus rededicated, as all Mormons expect it to be on 6th of April 2024, which is right before the total solar eclipse, the third day of darkness, when the Illuminati of the Scottish Rites plan to have completed the destruction of America and raised up the New World Order. Isn't that interesting timing? But the anniversary is when the Nauvoo Temple was dedicated on 1st of May, 1846. So let's go to time and date, and then go to 2024 to see which day of the week, the 1st of May, view calendar. Come on, guys. It's a Wednesday, so yeah. Not a convenient day to restart conferences. Whereas 6th of April and 7th of April already sets it up nicely for you. So there you go. Yeah, people were pissed with Brigham Young for delaying the dedication till May 1st. And Alpheus Cutler was one of those who parted with Brigham Young, as he was in the real administrative 12 of Joseph Smith, not the missionary 12. And so, yeah. And he also said that Joseph Smith said that the church would need to be restored when a certain sign in the heaven occurred. And it's interesting that the sign in the heaven occurred in Pisces, when he started up the church, as he believed that sign to have been done. And I've done the videos talking about this, and I'm not going to go into it, but food for thought. Alrighty, that's it. There's the history of polygamy in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the future plans and preparations. So remember, when you implement polygamy, I mean, we've got a lot of people dead already with coronavirus, and we're going to continue to see more and more people die before we get to 2024. So understand this, that they're purposely going to cause this extinction event so that they can have a necessity to implement polygamy again. This requires that a number of women survive. Sort of backfires if you kill off all the women. But we'll see how that works. But Nelson took away the high priest group, which means elders can no longer become high priests unless you become a leader in the church. Remember Brigham Young? Polygamy for the leaders. Oops, we're out of wives. Okay, you guys are now wicked because you don't have polygamous wives. You can't be in the celestial kingdom without a polygamous wife. So, hey, here's a brothel for you. However, if the church is going to be even more cruel and deny even brothels, guess what is going to happen to the elders who are out of luck? I'll give you a hint. The Egyptians who served the queen were eunuchs. Can't have elders fooling around with your wives. So be warned. Are you sure you want the church to be true?